Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. First day of the EB, just finished. I'll give you a little rundown of some of the content. I've also obviously got Kit McConnell with me, who's the sports director, who can talk in more detail about one of the decisions or anything else related to sport. So let me just quickly start off with a couple of quick issues. So following up on the IOC President's announcement during the recent WADA World Conference on Doping in Sport, the IOC Executive Board approved a budget of $5 million or up to $5 million US dollars over 10 years to be allocated in a comprehensive long-term storage program managed by the International Testing Agency. And it's estimated that could lead to up to 22,000 samples being kept. And this is part of the $10 million package that the President announced in Katowice. Management will be, as I say, the responsibility of the ITA, which now works with 41 international sports organisations and reinforces its role in international anti-doping operations. Also announced today changes to the athletes' parade. Obviously, the first case of that will be for the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020. We decided to make changes to the marching order for the opening ceremony. The team from the upcoming host countries of the corresponding games, so in summer, the summer upcoming, and in winter, the winter upcoming games, will now march immediately before the current host delegation. So as you know, that normally the host comes right at the end of the march. Closes the athletes' parade. This means that at Tokyo 2020, the three last teams to march will be in order: USA, France, and then Japan, in that order. USA, France, and then Japan in that order. The refugee Olympic team, which was second to last in Rio 2016, will now come at the beginning, just after Greece. As you know, Greece being the birthplace of the Olympic Games, the Greek team always opens the parade. The refugee Olympic team will come immediately after them. And the aim of that is to increase the special focus that future hosts already enjoy over the course of their Games preparations by giving them prominence in the stadium, and obviously with a global audience of several billion. It's good to give it some prominence. And then the last thing from me, some of you will be interested in changes of nationality. 3 changes of nationality, one for the Winter Youth Olympic Games, Lausanne 2020, and the other 2 for Tokyo, Olympic Games Tokyo 2020, in agreement as ever with the respective National Olympic Committees and the international federations. Athletes who are exempted from the required 3-year waiting period since the last representing their former countries are Miss Ailing Gu, freestyle skiing from the USA to China for Lausanne 2020. Ms. Emily Kay in cycling from Great Britain to Ireland, making an early exit from Brexit for Tokyo 2020. And thirdly, Maria Karenkova in gymnastics from Russia to Georgia. And that, again, is for Tokyo 2020. Now, as I said, one other bit of major news today. We approved, the Executive Board rather approved the sports and events programme for the Youth Olympic Games in Dakar 2022. So I think there will be a press release coming out shortly, but Kit is here just to give you a kind of a roundup and take any questions on that or any other sports-related matters. Kit.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I think, as Mark said, the press release will either be with you or with you very shortly. But I think today was another really positive step forward for the overall Olympic program in terms of the finalisation of the sport and event program for Dakar. As you know, this is the first Olympic event ever held in Africa, so it's a hugely historic event, not only for Senegal, not only for Africa, but for the wider Olympic movement. And with the sport program today, which builds on the 28 sports previously approved and adds in a further 5, we've really got a youthful, innovative, and fully gender equal program as we go into those Youth Olympic Games in 2022. As you know, in Lausanne, in just a matter of weeks now, we'll be introducing the Wave concept in the Youth Olympic Games for the first time, where the athletes don't have to stay at the Olympic Games for the full period, but based on their competition schedule, will stay for some days around that schedule. This allows us to increase the number of athletes slightly while keeping the numbers in the Olympic Village down at any given point in time. And we will also use this two-wave concept in Dakar, and I'll come on to the numbers in a second. We have identified venues for each of the venues and events in the program, and obviously with it being a Youth Olympic Games, we are working very closely with each of the international federations on the planning and the delivery of the events, and also to keep the costs and the complexity overall in the hosting and delivery of a Youth Olympic Games, keep those costs and complexity down by using the federations also as delivery planning and delivery partners. Dakar also reflects the move of the Youth Olympic Games to being more aligned with elite sport pathways. So you'll see when you look at the sport program and the event program, we have adjusted a number of events and athlete quotas from Buenos Aires as we look forward to Dakar. And in each case, each of the sports, each of the events, each of the athlete quotas has been reviewed to really make sure they have a fit towards an elite level pathway or elite level at their respective age grades. In summary, we had 4,000 athletes in Buenos Aires, which was fully gender equal, as you remember, 2,000 men, 2,000 women, and 239 events. We have maintained the number of events, so we will have 239 again in Dakar. In terms of the athlete numbers, with that two-wave approach, we can increase from 4,000 that we had in Buenos Aires to just over 4,500. I think 4,564 is the total number. But in doing that, and with the wave approach, we won't have more than 2,650 at any given point in time in Dakar. So while slightly increasing the overall number, by using that two-wave approach, we're actually reducing the number of athletes that will be in Dakar at any given point in time by around a third from what we had in Buenos Aires. I won't go through sport by sport, but just highlighting some of the change on a sport-specific basis in the previously confirmed 28 sports and sports like cycling. As you know, in the Youth Olympic Games, we have a maximum of 2 disciplines per sport. So for those sports that have more than 2 disciplines in the Olympic Games, like a cycling or an aquatics or a gymnastics, they are restricted to 2 disciplines in the Youth Olympic Games. In cycling, we finalised a program with the most universal form of the sport, road cycling, and also with the most youthful form of the sport, BMX freestyle, which obviously is making its debut in Tokyo next year. In rowing and canoeing, we've adapted the sport program to the local environment. So both rowing and canoeing will be using coastal versions of the sport, coastal rowing and beach canoeing, to adapt to the local environment. And wrestling has also adapted its program into with a focus on the YOG principles, and will be composed of freestyle wrestling and beach wrestling in place of Greco-Roman, which was in the program in Buenos Aires, again focusing on the possibilities that the flexibility of a youth program brings. In terms of additional sports, we did have proposals also from the Dakar Organising Committee, and some of the names of the additional sports will be familiar to you now. We finalised a program with 5 additional sports. The 4 that have been put forward by Paris, so skateboarding, surfing, sport climbing and breaking. Breaking, you remember, made its debut at the Youth Olympic Games in Buenos Aires. The other 3 are included in Tokyo and also included in the proposal for Paris. And the 5th sport is karate, which obviously is on the program for Tokyo and very hugely popular in Japan. You'll remember was not included in the proposal for Paris, but it was felt to be a very strong fit with its popularity in Africa and the simplicity of fitting it into the existing program. So surfing, sport climbing, skateboarding, and karate and breaking are the 5 additional sports added to the program for Dakar. And obviously those sports with Paris in mind, and this event being in 2022 provides those sports a further step in that pathway. 3 of them are in the program for Tokyo and Paris, and this is obviously halfway between the 2 games, so continues that pathway. And for the 3 of them, and including breaking, it's also a really good step towards Paris. When you think about the age of the athletes in some of these sports and the Youth Olympic Games being focused on that 15 to 18-year-old age group, there's actually quite a high possibility that the athletes we will see in Dakar will also be pushing for qualification and participation in Paris in those 4 sports. Just looking at the other key elements that will become apparent when you see the full program, we've obviously aimed to reduce the complexity of hosting the Youth Olympic Games. And as I noted, we've maintained the number of events while reducing the numbers of athletes in the Olympic Village at any given point in time. What that does do, and also by stretching the number of competition days, we actually reduce the number of events on each day by roughly a third. That means less venues operating, less transport systems operating, less volunteers needed, all of those things, so we can have the same number of events stretched over a slightly longer period with the two-wave system, which reduces the demands on the hosts for all of that local organisation. We've adapted to the local environment in Senegal. I highlighted those coastal sports of canoeing and rowing, the coastal versions. Equally, modern pentathlon will be using the open water for the swim leg, integrated into the laser run. And we've maximised the use of all of those venues. We're not looking to build new venues in Dakar. Let's be really clear about that. We'll be using temporary venues. We'll be using the existing venues. There are some venues that need refurbishment, and we're working with the various agencies to make sure that happens, but make sure it happens in a really cost-effective way and one that provides a real legacy and a sustainable legacy for the sport. We've continued that focus on innovation and youth sport, continuing those youth versions of the sports that we saw in Buenos Aires, futsal, hockey fives, 3-on-3 basketball that's been in the program for a while, and included other versions highlighted earlier, beach wrestling. And then just finally, with that elite athlete pathway, so YOG fits better into those elite athlete pathways across the sports. We've ensured a minimum of 12 athletes per individual event, unless the format of the sport is different. So we've really increased the numbers on a sport-specific basis to ensure there's real credibility at an event level. We've removed some of those events that you saw last time where we had athletes from different NOCs competing as a team in a medal event. This time around, the only mixed events will be with athletes from the same NOC, obviously similar to the Olympic Games themselves. But in those sports, we've increased the quota a little bit to have really credible competition with those NOC-specific teams. We've also reduced or removed the cap on the maximum number of athletes per NOC that was in place in Buenos Aires. They were limited to a maximum of 75 athletes per NOC in Buenos Aires, and equally a maximum of one men's team and one women's team. We've removed those restrictions, and obviously that increase in the athlete quota from from 4,000 to roughly 4,500 allows us to do that. So the NOCs won't have a maximum number of athletes, but with that additional quota, it doesn't mean we're taking the universality away. It just means that those biggest NOCs can bring their best athletes and not have to choose between the athletes that are eligible. And then finally, and really importantly, we've continued the drive for full gender equality. We had gender equality in total athlete numbers in Buenos Aires, and obviously do in Lausanne as well, here in the Winter Youth Olympic Games. For the very first time in Dakar, we will have gender equality in every single sport in athlete numbers, and we will have gender equality in the number of events and in every single sport in the number of events as well. So on a sport-specific basis, we'll have full gender equality in addition to the overall gender equality, which means in sports like boxing, like gymnastics, and like wrestling, we will have gender equality for the very first time in any form of the Olympic Games. So really a step forward in the overall push for gender equality as well. So Mark, that's a little bit the update on Dakar, and as I say, another really strong step forward in the overall place of the Youth Olympic Games, the growth of the program, and finding that balance between the traditions and what makes it strong, but continuing the innovation as well.
Thank you very much, Kit. Okay, open for questions as usual. Let's start over here with Liam, and then then we'll move forward. Liam.
Hi, Kit.
Liam.
Hi, Kit. Liam Morgan inside the game.
No, we can still hear.
Thanks. A couple of questions, Kit, if I may. Firstly, the decision to get rid of these mixed NOC, was that in response to some of the confusion that happened in Buenos Aires with some of the medals? I think at the time you said, we need to make sure they're credible events. Does that mean they weren't credible enough for Dakar? And secondly, on boxing, is boxing's place definite, or does this depend on the situation with AIBA, on how it's organised? Could we see something similar to Buenos Aires with PwC being brought in? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. In regards to the two questions, firstly, the one on the mixed NOC events, I think, as you said, one of the key criteria we had was credibility, and that wasn't just in relation to the mixed NOC events. That was in regard also to every event across the sports and the formats within those events. That meant we haven't continued a few of those events we had in Buenos Aires, which were combinations of different disciplines as well, where athletes had to compete in events they weren't necessarily specialised or experienced in, as well as their core events. So we've done away with those, and that credibility and understandability, while it sounds like pure common sense, has actually been a filter that we've put every event through. I wouldn't say that it calls into doubt the credibility of those mixed NOC events in Buenos Aires. I think what it does do is probably just align the event program in Dakar more clearly with the elite athlete pathway. So all of the events that we have in Dakar either are in the equivalent youth level world championships or in the senior level world championships, or where we've had to adapt to the local environment. There's really a strong reason for that adaptation. So in Dakar, again, any of the medal events will be with athletes from the same NOC, but I don't think it calls into doubt, the credibility of the medals won in those events necessarily in Buenos Aires. In regard to boxing, probably a couple of answers. Let's see what happens with the suspension of recognition post-Tokyo. You know the timeline, that we will come back and have a look at that, and the work of the monitoring group continues. At this stage, we've included boxing in the program. We don't see any reason to doubt that. The governance around that is obviously up to AIBA and up to the steps that they need to take, and ultimately the decision regarding the suspension of AIBA's recognition that will be taken post-Tokyo. But one way or another, we're planning to support the boxers and have boxing in the program in Dakar. And just to finish the reference to PwC, obviously we did have PwC overseeing a refereeing system put in place by AIBA in Buenos Aires. As you know, PwC is integrally involved in the whole referee and judge selection process for Tokyo 2020. And whether it's PwC or someone else, I think we'll make sure that level of integrity does continue in any format of boxing in Dakar.
Okay, I think, Reuters, I saw. Yes, Carlos.
Yes, Carlos Groman from Reuters. Question for Kit. Was there a report on the progress regarding AIBA? There was one on the agenda. Did you discuss it at all? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Carlos. In regard to AIBA, there was a brief verbal update from Mr. Lalovic in regard to the monitoring group, and I gave a brief verbal update in regard to the work of the task force itself. There were more detailed reports given at the last Executive Board meeting, which was only a matter of weeks ago. So there was no formal reports or written reports, but a brief verbal update on any developments since then.
Okay, Mark from L'Equipe.
I think that there will be no translation. I will ask my question in English and French too. There is no translation. Okay.
And you give us the choice for response, Mark, as well.
Sorry?
You give us the choice of language for response as well.
If there is no translation in English. Well, my two questions. The first one, if I well understood, there will be just coastal rowing and not classical rowing in Dakar. What's about the chance to see coastal rowing in Paris 2024? And my second question, I presume you were in Paris last week, and I would like to know what's the position of IOC about you, not EB tomorrow, position of IOC about the possibility to organize surf in Tahiti. Autrement dit, je traduis pour Eric. La première question, il n'y aura que de l'aviron de mer, si j'ai bien compris, aux Jeux Olympiques de la jeunesse. Hein? Il y a la
Okay, thank you.
He's going to do it in Australian.
Yeah, although I am a New Zealander, so... firstly, in regard to coastal rowing, as I explained it, for both rowing and canoeing, it's an adaptation to the local environment. So you'll remember both were on the river, the canal downtown in Buenos Aires as part of that really urban cluster that they had there. So not having a similar waterway, we've moved to the coastal. Coastal rowing itself, I think, is becoming a well-established form of rowing. They had, I think, the World Championships in Canada. More recently, they've had them in Hong Kong, which we understand was very successful. So it continues to develop. Obviously, it offers possibility for development as well as elite performance for a number of countries around the world with emerging rowing programs, and obviously with coastlines and maybe not necessarily the full 2,000-meter courses, but access to coastlines and the adaptation of the sport to those coastal environments gives real access to different countries, different programs around the world. So we're very comfortable and actually quite excited about introducing it into the Youth Olympic Games and giving it that platform for further growth and promotion. I wouldn't draw any conclusions as a result in regard to the program in Paris. Primarily, it's because of an adaptation to the local environment in Dakar, although we know that that World Rowing is continuing to develop it. And let's see the proposals that come forward for Paris. As you know, the federations have until early next year, the end of February, to make their proposals for Paris and the program, and then we'll work with them throughout next summer. So we've had some discussions with a number of federations, but it's really next year that detailed process moves into place for Paris, building up to the decisions in November, December next year for the full event program for Paris. In regard to surfing, I was not in Paris last week. Sorry, I had some meetings on back here. My team was there as part of the meetings. I think we're waiting for. There have been some preliminary discussions. Obviously, we know the venues that were bidding to be considered as the surfing venue for Paris, but we're not anticipating a decision just yet.
Hey, Kit, Brian Pinelli, Around the Rings. Just a question about the two-wave system. Obviously, the purpose and the benefits seem quite clear. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of how this came about, maybe whose idea it was, how it was developed? And then secondly, I mean, is it a strict system? I mean, let's say an NOC has less athletes competing in the second week. You know, for example, an athlete won a gold medal in the first week and wants to stay around for the closing ceremony. I guess just simplifying that, is there any flexibility in terms of the numbers, or do the athletes definitely have to leave after the first week and can't arrive until the second week? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It really came from a couple of considerations. One was obviously finding more flexibility around the hosting of the games, and the demands of an Olympic Village are a pretty particular demand at any games, be it Youth Olympic Games or Olympic Games. So finding a solution where we could have more flexibility on the athlete numbers while reducing the overall demands of an Olympic Village and keeping the village concept itself and not spreading the athletes out across hotels or other areas like you have in other events. This really keeps the uniqueness of the games as well. So finding that flexibility while keeping the cost and complexity for the host down was one driver. The second was we also need to remember some of the demands on these age grades. Most of them are still at school. A lot of them have studies and other commitments, and we found that in some cases that was actually a barrier to participation because they did have existing school commitments, study commitments, sport commitments outside the Youth Olympic Games. So it does allow a little bit more flexibility in that regard as well. So all of the athletes will stay in the Olympic Village rather than spreading out in accommodation outside. The two waves obviously varies by sport. There are some sports, team sports or weight category sports where you can only fight every couple of days for the recovery period that's spread out a little bit longer over the two waves. But in the general case, the athletes arrive a few days before their competition and leave afterwards, but still fully engage in all of those particular athlete education, engagement, fun activities, learning activities that we have around the Youth Olympic Games as well. All of them will be part of either the opening or the closing ceremony, some both, where the schedule stretches in between, right across the games, but most are one or the other. And you can see by the numbers, if we're looking at 4,500 athletes in Dakar and a maximum of 2,650, then the vast majority are there for one of the two waves, but some of them spread across. The other benefit is it also gives us more flexibility in terms of use of venues. So by adding a few more competition days in Dakar compared to Buenos Aires, we can actually use less venues for the same number of sports. And finally, if an athlete did want to stay, I think we'd obviously look to support that, bearing in mind if the village capacity wasn't available, we'd be looking to engage with that athlete and that NOC as much as possible.
Eric, down the front here.
C'est traduit ou I cannot.
Oh,
okay. What about the parade? You mentioned that the order we changed. Why did you decide to change the order? Why?
So two things. One, to give the future hosts more prominence, so people could actually see. It would promote the upcoming Olympic Games, so that people would know, because the big moment, obviously, in Japan is when the Japanese team comes in. But just ahead of that would be the French team, and ahead of that would be the US team. So it would be given more prominence. And equally with the refugee Olympic team, we want to give that some big prominence. Traditionally, as you know, the Greek team, because of the founding of the Games, comes first, and then it would come straight after that. So it would give them much higher profile.
And the other countries will go in the alphabetical.
It will be, yeah, as.
And last question, did you talk about Russia and anti-doping today?
Yes, yeah, it was discussed. There was a reasonably long discussion. You will have seen our statement from last week. All I can confirm is that we reconfirm that statement. You'll know there's an executive committee of WADA very shortly, and so we would wait for that to make its recommendations and to hear the findings before we make any further statement. I think that's probably what you expect me to say. Graham.
It's good timing. To follow up on that, with 5 days of fairly top-level IOC meetings, an EB straight on to an Olympic summit, and now with the WADA meeting coming into Lausanne, is the plan that you take a very strong position going into that WADA meeting? Are you any concern that there's a perception that?
Well, we would take. Is that the question? Or?
Well, the perception that it's maybe encroaching a little on.
No, I mean, I think you've seen the statement, Graham, and we condemn the actions of those responsible for the manipulations in the strongest possible terms. We say it's an attack on sport itself and the integrity of sport. So we've taken a very strong position. As for further developments, we really have to wait for the executive committee of WADA to meet before we can make any further statement. Because as yet officially, the report and the findings haven't been made public, so we would have to wait for that. What we have is the summary by WADA on which we commented.
So after you have made that strong statement already last week, why is there a need for the Olympic Summit to discuss it further or to make another statement?
We have an Olympic Summit every year, and this is no exception. It's the 8th one, and it's been scheduled in the schedule since probably, I think, January or February. So it's a scheduled meeting. No doubt it will be discussed amongst other things, but there are a whole range of 7 or 8 different topics on the agenda for the summit.
So no concerns about sort of perception of sort of seeming to give a sort of direction to?
No, I don't think so, Graham, because we depend on your unbiased reporting to not lead to those perceptions.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Holger.
Holger Kühner from ARD. Just to clarify, it would be, Mark, the EB that would have to take any action against Russia. It would be the EB and not the session.
Good question. I'm not totally clear on that. I mean, I think we have to wait and see with the findings of the EXCO, but I would imagine, thinking about it, it may well, I would think the Executive Board would be able to make a decision. To be honest, we don't have to make a decision because WADA is the responsible in this and will take the actions necessary. So it's a process that needs to go from WADA and then, I guess, eventually to CAS, there will be a decision. So, in a sense, I'm not quite clear what our decision making would be in that process. But first off, we'd have to. It's a long way down the line. First off, we have to have a decision made.
Excuse me, if I may, just on that. Given that the Olympics are essentially an invitational event, so it's the IOC extending invitations, wouldn't it be up to the IOC to either extend an invitation to Russian athletes or not? Thank you.
So based on the findings when we get them, when the EXCO makes a decision, whatever that may be, then we would study that and decide what the next step would be. But until we see that, we can't actually do anything about it.
A question to Kit, the two-wave system, would that be a model for the Olympic Games in future, maybe?
No, thanks, Olga. We're not looking to implement it at the Olympic Games. It's something very specific to the Youth Olympic Games. Obviously, part of the experience of the Olympic Games remains for the athletes to be in the Olympic Village for the whole period. So we're not looking to extend that to the Olympic Games themselves. But as I've highlighted, I think it gives real flexibility and additional positive possibilities around the Youth Olympic Games. But no, not planned to be the model for the Olympic Games, where that athlete experience in the village is something very precious, and we'll keep it the way it is.
Yes, Eric.
We saw that the IOC has the power to move the marathon from Tokyo to Sapporo. Will IOC have the final word on the venue for surfing for Paris 24?
Well, I think like all venues, it's a matter of agreement between the organising committee, the IOC, and the respective international federation, in this case the ISA. So as it was in Sapporo, and as it has been for all of the venue agreements in any games, so it's a matter for the three parties to agree together.
Hi, my name is Kentaro. I'm from the Japanese newspaper Yomiuri. This is a question to Kit. I'd like to ask about karate, and you touched a little about it, but can you elaborate on how it was chosen, and was it chosen by the IOC or was it proposed by Dakar? Can you explain the whole procedure? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All five of the sports that were confirmed today were ultimately proposed by the organising committee. I think there was, like any organising committee, we work with them on what their vision of the games is, and then those additional sports are subject to approval by the IOC Executive Board. In the case of the Youth Olympic Games, they don't have to go to the session; they only go to the Executive Board. In regard to karate, I think there was a feeling that it builds on the momentum from Tokyo 2020. Obviously, it was not included in the Paris 2024 proposal for new sports. They have a very different vision, if you like, for more urban, the cultural sports from the streets, if you like. So that's why they proposed the four sports they proposed. I think once proposed by Dakar, there was a feeling that with its popularity in Africa, with its simplicity of fitting into the existing venue schedule, and with the relatively low numbers of athletes that are needed in an individual sport, there was a really good package of reasons to include it. So it does continue that Olympic connection, if you like, from Tokyo through to 2022. And look, it's a hugely popular global sport, I think, as we discussed when we were talking about the proposals for Paris also. So it gives them the opportunity to continue that Olympic pathway, even if the possibility isn't there for Paris.
I'm Nomiyama coming from Japanese TV broadcaster TV Asahi. Regarding marathon at Sapporo, in Japan, attention is paid to marathon course and schedule now. So is this decided in tomorrow meeting? And what's the most difficult point to decide course and schedule?
I think we probably want to go into any of the conversation related to Sapporo and the marathon and race walks tomorrow, to be fair. You know, the Tokyo 2020 organising committee is presenting tomorrow morning our time. So I think in tomorrow's press conference there'll be some more information about those discussions. And obviously there have been a lot of discussion with Tokyo and through Tokyo with Sapporo, with the local hosts, with World Athletics, obviously as the governing body since the collective decision was taken. But let's report on that tomorrow once we've had the chance for the discussions at the EB.
Yeah, again, following today's WADA report, and I understand that you said you'll need to see what their decision is on Monday. That being said, did you get a sense from the executive board that there's a strong sense of urgency, a strong sense of concern here? I mean, obviously this isn't the first time this has happened. I mean, is there an alarming sense here to practice zero tolerance moving forward here in the months ahead?
Yeah, I mean, there's an executive meeting of WADA in the next few days, so obviously things are moving pretty quickly. We reconfirmed our statement where we said we condemned it in the strongest terms, and it was an attack on sport itself. So I think that speaks for itself. And we asked, obviously, for the raw data to be given up as if it can be by those responsible. So I think we made it pretty clear. And there's a meeting in the next few days, so it couldn't be happening more quickly.
I mean, did any of the EB members express their mind, express their opinion? Where there's their dialogue today?
Yes, I mean there was unanimity with the statement that people are extremely upset and they condemn it in the strongest terms. There was no one demurred from that view. Everyone was unanimous in that view, or the meeting was unanimous in the view that this was to be condemned and that the strongest action possible should be taken against it. Okay. Yeah, Liam.
Hi, Mark, just a couple for you. The NOC's report was on the agenda today. The National Olympic Committee's report was on the agenda today. Was there any update on India or Italy? They're both sort of struggling with sports bills, which the IOC believes might interfere with the autonomy of sport. And just quickly, excuse my pronunciation, but the Iranian judoka, Saeed Molai, who was basically defected from Iran after being asked to throw a match. He's been cleared to compete for Mongolia by the IJF. Has the IOC Executive Board received a change in allegiance, possibly for him for Tokyo 2020? Because it would have to have the approval of the NOC, and he's in dispute with the Iranian NOC. So what would be the solution there?
Yeah, on that one, I don't think we've received any official notification. I'm aware of the story and the update, but I don't think and it wasn't discussed today, but I would presume that would be something that would come to us. India, to my memory, was not discussed at all today, but Italy was. There was a short discussion about what was happening there, and I think one could characterise it as being an optimistic discussion and discussions with the government about the law. And to get some clarification and hopefully to resolve that problem. But I think I would characterise it as a positive report about what's going on there with their law. Yes, Graham.
Among the unanimous condemnation around the table, was there any opinions expressed about Sport Accord choosing Saturday morning to announce it was going to go to Russia for 2021? Which seemed to be getting ahead of the WADA meeting.
Yeah, wasn't discussed, no.
No opinion expressed?
No opinion was expressed on that, no. Okay, so tomorrow, yes, I'm being told that that's the end, thank you. So I think same time tomorrow, is that right, Rachel? And I think with Christophe Duby, I hope. Yeah, okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Cheers, cheers. There's table tennis now, apparently, and drink. More importantly, there's drink as well. So.